stanza of Holy, 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 the second and last stanza of Worthy of Worship, and the first stanza of To God Be the Glory. And if you didn't follow that, then just follow us. We will sing. Would you join us as we stand and worship? Holy, holy, holy. Would you take some time to welcome each other this evening as our worship continues?
one good thing that happened this morning, besides my preaching. I mean, I know that was real. What are you laughing about, Matthew? You've had to preach before, man. Come on. Matthew's the first one horse laughing me up here. Anyway, back to reality. No, but in all seriousness, we had a lady get saved after church today, so that was exciting to get to talk with her and get her to make that commitment. And so we'll be baptizing her here in the next several weeks. And so with that being said, we're going to get started. We're, as I said, in Revelation chapter 13 tonight, and we are in verses 11 through 18. Now, remember last week, and I have to make a confession, if my laser pointer goes out on me, it's because I was playing with Ben and Patience and all my other friends in the nursery a little bit ago. And so, anyway, and did you know that kids that age are like a cat? You can just run that thing around and they'll chase it. I mean, I would have stayed, I kept thinking, I've got to quit or I'm going to burn my battery up. I'm going to quit or I'm going to burn my battery up. Anyway, so tonight we are continuing in our study, and we are still at the halfway point of the tribulation. If you remember, chapter 13 is sort of this parentheses in the story, sort of as if John takes this outer view of everything and says, hey, this is everything that the Antichrist does during the entire tribulation period up until the return of Christ. And he talks about that in the first part of chapter 13. And then in verses 11 through 18, he's doing the same thing. It's still this sort of pause in the story, and it's like, hey, this is what the false prophet does throughout the entire time of the tribulation. And so we are at that halfway point in our chronology of our timeline. And so tonight we're looking at verses 11 through 18. And we're going to be talking about the false prophet. And so the way to look at this is that the false prophet is sort of the yin and the yang with the Antichrist, if you want to look at it in that sort of a mindset. He is the right-hand man, so to speak, for the Antichrist in regards to, obviously, if he's called the false prophet, he's a religious leader. And so if the Antichrist is handling all the governmental, economic, all the leadership stuff of the world during this time, then the false prophet is going to be the main religious leader in the world who is in connection with the Antichrist. And that's who we're talking about tonight. And really what the false prophet, one of his main goals, one of his main objectives is to get people to worship the Antichrist during the entire tribulation period, I'm not going to ruin anything for you by this, but the Antichrist and the false prophet are defeated essentially at the return of Christ. And so, anyway, we're going to look tonight at beginning with verses 11 and 12, and we're going to read in sections tonight rather than reading the entire section of Scripture for tonight. We're going to read just a few verses. So we're going to read verses 11 and 12, and this is going to show us some of the characteristics of this false prophet. And so it says, "Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed." And so right there we see that there is some information that tells us about worship and one thing and another, but we see several characteristics. We see 5 characteristics there in your notes about the false prophet. And the first one we see is it says, "Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth." Now remember, the Antichrist is the one who came out of the sea, meaning that it was indicative of him coming out of the region around the Mediterranean Sea, meaning that he would have Roman and Grecian, I guess, or Greek bloodlines. And so we knew that. But what we see here is that this says that the false prophet is coming out of the earth. And so what that, many Bible teachers think is that means that he's going to be an apostate Jew, meaning that he is a Jew that no longer practices, one that has walked away from his faith. And that he also leads Israel into making the covenant with the Antichrist that he will make right after the rapture, and that the Antichrist will break that covenant with Israel at the midpoint of the tribulation. And so I was about to get ahead of myself a second ago, but right there you see that this false prophet is going to hide his apostasy. He's not going to be openly blatant, letting people know that he's no longer a practicing Jew. He's going to instead sort of hide his apostasy and probably go through the motions and things like that. And he's going to do that until the middle of the tribulation period. And so he's going to hide his apostasy until then. And so at that point, you can go ahead, Daryl, to the next one. At that point, in the midway point of the tribulation, that's when like everything gets, not that it wasn't already chaotic, but there's going to be a lot of upheaval, a lot of I'm trying to think of the right word for it. There's going to be a lot of revealing of people's true natures, I think is the best way to put it. Because at that point, people are going to see that the Antichrist wasn't their buddy all along. They're going to find out that this false prophet is not the religious leader that he claimed to be. And so all of a sudden, the veil is going to be pulled back, and they're going to see behind the curtain and see just how wicked these people were. Now, it says there in the next part of verse 11 there that he had horns like a lamb. And when he references him like this, the thing you have to understand is that lambs don't have horns. And horns are, as you see there in the notes, a symbol of authority. We've talked about that throughout our study, that when you see reference to the horns that are given to these creatures at times in the prophecies that the prophets have, they have these horns, and that's a symbol of authority. Well, in this same case, it's showing us that this false prophet is going to have a lot of authority, but he's going to be a lamb. And do lambs have horns? Not when they're small, not like that. And so what it's showing us is he's going to have authority, but he's going to be sort of he's going to look all gentle and helpful and things like that. And essentially, he's going to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's essentially what he's going to be. And he's going to be on the world stage leading people to worship the Antichrist and be the major religious figure of the day. And so we also see that it says that he spoke like a dragon. And what he's talking about there is obviously a reference to Satan, because throughout the scriptures and specifically in the book of Revelation, when they talk about a dragon, we know that it's a reference to Satan. And so this gives us the idea that he's going to derive his power of speech from Satan. Now think about that. He is going to be the slickest salesman in the world in that regard. You see what I'm saying? He's going to be able to sell the world, the entire world, on this belief that the Antichrist is deserving of worship. I mean, that's what he's going to do. Because think about it. What did Satan do in the garden as the serpent with Eve? He very easily, in just a moment, got her to doubt what God had said and what God meant, and to confuse her. And that was just very simple and easy, for him. So you can imagine what's going to happen when the false prophet has come to power and is given a lot of power, and he has the opportunity to lead people in the world to worship the Antichrist. And so that's going to be his main focus there. And so he's going to be the main spokesman for this worldwide religion that the Antichrist is going to sort of look, as we said last week, he's going to look like he's being controlled by it, but at the halfway point of the tribulation, he's going to overthrow them and then be worshipped himself. The fourth characteristic we see is that it says he exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf. And so what that means is the Antichrist and the false prophet are going to be sort of inseparable. They're going to have a very good relationship, a very close relationship. And what that means is that the Antichrist is going to give the false prophet power over whatever. And so probably he's going to give him free reign in the religious sector of the world to combine all the world religions, get them all under the same umbrella, and then halfway through the tribulation period, when he breaks that covenant with Israel and they start to show their true colors. At that point, since the false prophet has consolidated everything, then they're just going to turn the focus and point it at the Antichrist and get people to worship him. And so the fifth characteristic we see is that he made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. The first beast is the Antichrist. And so the false prophet is, he's assuming this power. He's doing the things that he needs to do, and he's got this speech from the devil. And so basically what he's going to do is he's going to drive people to worship the Antichrist. That is his sole objective in life, so to speak, is that as things progress through the tribulation period for those 3.5 years up until the breaking of the covenant with Israel and the midway of the tribulation period, up until that point, his role may look a little different, but from the middle to the last part of the tribulation period, he's going to be doing nothing but getting people to worship the Antichrist. Now remember, the Antichrist is going to be killed in some way, assassinated in some way, and he's going to be resurrected, as we talked about last week, by Satan himself. And so you can imagine that this religious leader who is trying his very best to get the entire world to worship the Antichrist, you have something like that happen about halfway through the tribulation, and he is resurrected. You can imagine the power he'll have, how easy it'll be for him to get people to believe that there is something godlike about the Antichrist. And so he's going to be the one that is responsible for the religious system of the Antichrist, or the world system at that time. And I like the way our author puts it in the commentary, is that he'll essentially be the high priest. And that's a good definition, or a good example of what he'll be. He'll be the high priest of the world religious system during the tribulation period. Now, in your notes there, it talks about the satanic trinity, and if you think about it, the author Tim LaHaye makes a really good argument for this sort of satanic trio or trinity, if you want to look at it that way, because as we know, Satan has always been anti-God. He's done everything he could to disrupt God's plans, and he's even tried to rebel against God and do all of those things. So it's easy for us to see that Satan is anti-God. And then the man's name or title is literally Antichrist. So that one's not hard to figure out. That he would be, as we talked about last week, everything he does is the opposite of what Christ would do. And then if you look at the false prophet, he would essentially be anti-spirit. He would be the one that is leading people to worship the Antichrist. Well, what is the Holy Spirit's job? Is not to be worshipped himself, but to point to Jesus and to get people to worship Jesus. And so you can see very easily that it's very interesting, the case that he makes for that, but it's very valid as well. It's sad how easily that lines up. But then in verses 13 through 15 in Revelation chapter 13, we're going to look at these supernatural powers that the false prophet's going to have. So let's look at verses 13 through 15. It says, beginning in verse 13, it says, "And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast. He deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. He was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that it could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed." And so right here we see that there are really some very supernatural powers that this false prophet's going to have during that time. And the first there in verse 13, it says, "And he performed great and miraculous signs." And, the word, as you see there, translated miraculous signs, is the same one that John used in his gospel to describe the ministry of Jesus. And so these are going to be things that are these miracles, so to speak, that's not even the right term, because miracles are things only God can do. These these miraculous signs, things that look like they're counterfeits of a true miracle. When he does these, it's going to be reminiscent of what is scriptural that Jesus did while he was here on earth. And remember, if the Antichrist and the false prophet can get people thinking in that vein of thought, well, wait a minute, I've heard about this sort of thing before. Oh, yeah, I read about that in the Bible, or I've heard that story in the Bible, and wow, here's somebody doing it right here in front of me. This has to be God, or this has to be my Savior. And so it's going to be easy for these people to be fooled during this time. And so the miraculous signs make us think that Satan is the one that has equipped him to be able to do these things, because they're obviously not coming from God. But it doesn't seem to, as it says there, it doesn't seem surprising that he's going to try and reproduce some of the miracles that we read about in the Scriptures. That one we read there about, as we look at the next one, says even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Who is that reminiscent of? Elijah, right? And so Elijah with his worship contest with the prophets of Baal, we see that in his story. But the fire test of Elijah, the prophet, will probably be repeated, is what our author says about this causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. And so that could be one of the reasons why one of the two witnesses that we read about back in Revelation chapter 11, I believe it is, that could be why one of those may very well be Elijah, is because of the symbolism there and the counterfeit nature of what the false prophet is doing to sort of mimic what is done in the Scriptures. And he does ask a really good question. People may ask, why will God permit such power to be in Satan's hands? And, he makes a good argument there, and I tend to agree with him. It's because during that time, if all of the power was on God's side, if God just did everything on his side, then people would not have to choose to follow him by faith. Because if it was a one-sided fight and God holds all the cards, so to speak, then what would it take for you to follow God at that point? It'd just take common sense. Because this is an obvious loser over here, yet God is going to win because he holds all the cards and he's got all the power. Well, during the tribulation period, not that it's even, but it's going to appear like it is even to some degree. And what that's going to require, or what that's going to require of people living during the tribulation period, is they have to decide for themselves. Because think about it. If God had exercised all the power that we know he has during the tribulation period and just totally, whooped Satan at the very beginning, then at that point, people are just naturally going to look at it and be like, oh, well, I'm just going to follow that. And at that point, what that is God forcing people to choose him. With what seems to be an even playing field, God's giving them free will. He's giving them the opportunity to decide whether they're going to follow him or not. And so that's why during the tribulation period, I agree with Tim LaHaye in that regard, that I think that's probably why it is, why things are going to be so bad and why Satan's going to seem to, for that 7-year period, just have control over everything, is to allow people that one last chance during those last 7 years to make their decision if they're going to follow Christ or not. And we're going to see what's going to happen with some of them who don't follow him here in just a minute. The last one of the powers that we see here is that it says that he set up an image and he was given power to give breath to the image. And so the false prophet is going to cause people to build this image like Nebuchadnezzar's image that we read about in the book of Daniel. Now, it's not the exact same statue or anything like that. What it's going to, Nebuchadnezzar's statue was one of him, and it was like 90 feet tall, and I mean, it was this huge statue that they put out in the plain of Shinar, I think it was. And so they have this huge statue, this whole huge golden statue. out there for people to worship. Well, in the tribulation period, the false prophet is going to leap because of his power. He can say, hey, guess what, guys? I think we need a statue of our fearless leader. We need a statue of the Antichrist. He's not going to call him the Antichrist, but you get the point. And so they're going to make this statue, and then there's going to be something very weird about the way he is able to exercise some of the power given to him, because he's going to have the ability to bring this statue to life. Now, when I think about that, the first time I read that, I was like, oh, he's talking about like animatronics, like, it's a small world after all, or something like that at Disney World or something. I'm like, but the more I read that and the more I thought about that, I'm like, this is supernatural. It's not man-made. The statue will be man-made, but the way that it's given breath, meaning that it will be able to speak and it will be able to kill people, so to speak, or call for them to be killed. At that point, what that means is that there is going to be something very supernatural about this, and there's going to be people looking for the wires. They're going to be looking behind it. They're going to be wanting to see the wizard behind the curtain type thing, and it's not going to be there. And there's not going to be an explanation for it, because it's going to be something supernatural that Satan has endowed or given his power to allow this to happen. Now, just like Nebuchadnezzar's image, which we think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They did not bend a knee to worship the statue, and so they're thrown into the fiery furnace in the hopes of killing them. Instead, what happens is Nebuchadnezzar loses some guards. They're killed by the flames, and Nebuchadnezzar gets to see not only those three men, but Christ in the flames with them during that time. And so he used that statue as a means of weeding out those that he would have killed that would not follow him and worship his stuff. Well, in the same mindset, the false prophet will be able to use this statue to have people killed who will not worship that statue. And Revelation 20 verse 4 tells us that most likely they'll be killed by beheading. And so we see some of that today, especially in places like Egypt and places like that, where members of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations will behead Christians because they won't conform to Islam or something like that. And although that is a very extremist view of the Muslim faith, it doesn't change the fact that these are still Christians being martyred for their faith. Regardless. And so we see that even in our day, but it's going to be a more regular thing, evidently, during the tribulation. And, I think the thing that should trouble us, even though we won't be here for that, is the fact that people are going to get desensitized to it. They're going to be desensitized to the fact that Christians are going to be killed wholesale for 7 years. It's just, it's just another group of Christians. It's sort of like turning on the news and not even watching the weather because it's going to rain this week. Okay, no big deal. And you go on, you're sort of desensitized to what's going on with the news or something like that. And I'm afraid that's what it'll be like in the tribulation period. Now, in verses 16 through 18 of Revelation chapter 13, this is where we get to see the mark of the beast. And so we're going to answer a lot of your questions about the mark of the beast, and we'll talk about that. So let's look at verses 16 through 18 in your Bibles. It says, "He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. So there's a lot of information in just that little set of scripture that tells us a whole lot about this mark of the beast that's going to be used during the tribulation period. The first thing we see is that it comprises the numbers that we know in our numeric symbols as 6, 6, and 6. And so I know a lot of times people are, you'll see people are sort of superstitious about that number today. Well, if this is happening during the tribulation period, it's not going to apply to us anyway. So the rapture is going to happen before the tribulation. So, I see that, somebody wants to write me a check for $666, go ahead and do it. It ain't going to hurt my feelings. It don't bother me. It's just a number, just like 777 or 321 or whatever you want to call it. But the thing is that this number, when it's calculated, comes to the numbers 666. And we know that from biblical numerology that 6 is the number of human beings. It's sort of the number that is generally in biblical numerology, or the study of numbers in the Bible. It is oftentimes that 6 is correlated with man. Man was created on the 6th day, and a lot of times the number 7 is seen as the number of perfection, because God created everything in 7 days, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of times when you see the number 6 in the scriptures, it's pointing to humanity or mankind. One of the things we don't know, as you see there in your notes, is we don't know why there's 3 digits that are used. We don't know why weren't there 4, why weren't there 2, why are there 3 6s? We don't know. That's just not something that we know. But the Bible does indicate that it somehow will mathematically speak the name of the Antichrist. And so what that means is that during the tribulation period, when the Antichrist is coming to power, and he's coming into his own, what we see is that something about the numerology of the mark of the beast, the numbers, how it adds up, one thing another, it comes to it correlates to the actual name of the Antichrist. Not Antichrist, but his given name, if you want to look at it in that way. And so, but we don't even know the math of that. And so there's been people for generations, for millennia, have tried to figure out who it was going to be, and tried to say, well, this person is the Antichrist because if you do this, mathematics with his, name, and you take this letter and you do all this, well, it's 666. Well, it doesn't matter because the rapture hasn't happened yet. It's not that person. And so, people would say that, somebody like Adolf Hitler was the Antichrist, or this governmental person across the globe, or this president, or whoever is the Antichrist. No, they're not. It doesn't matter because, it doesn't matter who people say the Antichrist is, because we're not going to be here when they're here, so we're not going to know who it is. But nevertheless, we also know that the number will not be revealed until the halfway point of the tribulation. And so what you got to think about is the fact that here the Antichrist has been consolidating his power. He's been taking power from the kings of the earth. He's taken their economic power. He's taken their military might. And now he's got all of the world religion consolidated, and he's got his right-hand man, the false prophet, handling all of that for him. And so at the halfway point of the tribulation, when he breaks that covenant with Israel and everybody's true colors are starting to be seen, what we see is that this is when he requires the mark of the beast, for people to get the mark of the beast. And it says that it will be on their right hand or on their forehead. And we think, well, that's kind of crazy. Who's going to have something put on their forehead? Something like that. Well, in the scriptures we see too that, as we'll see later in Revelation, that the saints in heaven will have the name of God, or have it on their head as well. And so we got to remember that the vanity that we have in this earth, in this world, about our looks and our bodies and things like that, will not be the same in eternity. And we don't know what our glorified bodies will exactly be like anyway. And so, but what we do know is that during it says that there in chapter 13, it says that they will have that mark on their hand or on their forehead. And so not only that mark will be used, as it says there in your notes, as a means of forcing people to worship the Antichrist. Because what they'll say is that if you don't have the mark, then you can't worship him. But if you do have the mark, you need to worship him. And so they'll force people to worship him. And not only that, to even buy and sell things after the halfway point of the tribulation, you have to have that mark on your hand or on your forehead. So you can't even go to the store. You can't buy bread. You can't buy anything. You can't sell anything without that mark. And so, you see people that say things like barcodes and one thing's in another, microchips in your skin and one thing in another, or the mark of the beast and all that sort of stuff. Again, no, it's not, because we're not halfway through the tribulation period. But what we do realize is that by then we don't know what technological advances there will be that will allow for people to have things like those microchips or something far more advanced than what we know of today, that will be what they use for buying and selling. I mean, think about it, the chip in your debit card or credit card, you can just sit there and wave it across some devices and it takes the money out of your checking account. Or adds it to your credit card. What's the difference between swiping a card across, not even inserting or swiping it, but just sort of placing it on it? What's the difference between doing that with a card or doing that with your hand? There's really not a big difference. And so could that be something like that? Yes. But it's got to be something topical, because it's noticeable. It's something that people can recognize and can see, because that will be something that they use in that manner. And for those who receive the Antichrist mark, essentially they have made their decision about eternity. After you get that mark, there's essentially no hope for heaven, I guess is the way to put it. And so they will have made their rejection of Christ permanent and eternal, and they will go from having the opportunity to select Jesus and follow him and put their faith in him, to being, for lack of a better term, damned for all of eternity. I mean, that's what it will happen. So that's the end of what the false prophet will be doing for Revelation chapter 13. And so, are there any questions about